Welcome. Today we're going to do something that's a little bit different in the jewelry class. I really find it's important that we know how to make tools or alter tools or create tools that will allow us to make things that nobody else can make. Because I've had students go, gosh, I saw somebody using this stamp that I bought, and it's like, well, yeah, it's universal. So in my intermediate class, what I love to do is I love to have my students make two tools. And one of them is a scribe, and yes, you can run out and you can buy a scribe pretty cheaply, but I really think it's a really great tool to learn to make. You can make them in different sizes. This one's all rusty, and I'll talk about cleaning that up. Some people like writing with like a crayon. I kind of like the more delicate hold in your hand. The twist here is partially decoration, but it's also almost like what's called knarling, a way so that you get a better grip on the tool. The reason I have you guys make these, and they're not like the ones you buy, is when you buy them, they have a point on each end. What I want to teach you how to do is how to grind around, and I also want to have you make a slotted screwdriver. And the slotted screwdriver is challenging to grind these so that they're parallel and they come to a nice end. You're gonna say, what am I gonna use these for? This scribe is gonna give you much more accurate detail when you start using it for your stone setting. When we're starting to work with 3mm stones, the thickness of a leaded pencil is gonna have a huge impact on your measurements. So this is a steel pencil that scribes on your metal really well. And this end, I like to have you guys learn to just pull that taper or grind that taper, and then you can use this on your flex shaft for your screwdriver end that's on it. So that's the first one we do. And I'm gonna have everybody cut a piece of tool steel, 6 inches, and then you're gonna grind the ends, polish them up, and then we're gonna hot twist them. So this video will be in segments. Right now I want to talk about the project, the tools you're going to make, and what you're going to need for it. The second tool I want you guys to do is I want you to design a stamp. And so a stamp, everybody wants to jump right in and make their hallmark or make their initials. What I want to say to you is it's a little difficult to do interior spaces. So I really encourage you guys, and you'll all want to take a piece of paper and a pen. And so if I've got a square piece of stock, or I've got a round piece of stock, or I've got a triangular piece of stock, that might influence the design that I have. And so this was designed based off of using square stock, where I use a triangular file, and I went in and I filed the material away till I got the look I was after. With the round one, this one here, I kind of wanted to do a flower shape, so I drilled a hole in the middle with a drill bit. And I should say that when you're working with the tool steel and it's annealed, you can use your soft frame, you can use your file, you can use the steel drill bits. When it's hardened, you're just gonna ruin your tool. So you're gonna hear me all the time say, you need to do a file test. And what I mean about a file test is to take, this one's hardened so it won't do it. But if I have a piece that's not hardened, what I can do is I can take a file to it, and if the file starts to remove material, then I know that this is not work hard or hardened and tempered. Whereas this, can you hear the sound? And it's really not doing anything on this because this has been hardened. Okay, so you will save yourself a lot of grief if you use the file test to find out when you get your material to work with. But this round one that I'm working with, I drilled that hole, and then I just came in with a triangular file and I tried to make some petals. And fortunately my file, or my stamp that I made, is better than my drawing here, but you kind of get the idea. And then I have, this was a triangular file that didn't have any life left in it. And so old used files, if you go to a garage sale, you can pick them up for 50 cents, $1, and you can tell that they don't have any teeth left on them, then that's a really good piece of steel to work with. So I took this one and all I did was use my round file to create the curve going in, so it was kind of like an arrowhead that was on there. Okay. So your material that you work with is going to be important. So you need, what I'm going to have you guys do is do some, like at least 6 little drawings of what you want. I kind of want to do a fern piece, so I'm going to probably grind the end of my file like this, and then I'm going to go back in and cut and shape so it starts to look like a file. And I can even use my jeweler's saw to cut down the middle, and now it's starting to look more like a feather than a fern. But I want you guys to do some quick sketches to figure out what shape you want to use of metal tool stock, and then what your pattern's going to be. And then to add on to this is, yes, you need to make a scribe. It's going to be a great tool for you. You need to make a stamp, and with that stamp you have to use it in a project this quarter. If you don't use it, you have to donate it to the school. That's what I always say. Nobody ever does that, but that encourages them. So I just have 2 pieces here that are band rings. And this one I made a crescent shape. And while this was laying flat and the 2 half rounds soldered on the edges, I stamped it on a steel block to get my pattern on here that repeats and goes all the way around and hopefully hides where the seam is. And then this one here, I made a exclamation point, and then I used it as a pattern, 2 horizontally, 2 vertically, 2 horizontal, 2 vertically, just to have a really kind of nice dot pattern that goes around like that. So it doesn't have to be too terribly involved, but I do want you to start thinking about how to use your stamps. I had a student who really did some neat things where she would take a piece, and then maybe she'd take a round. I'm not fond of hearts, but she did. So this was a round piece of stock that she filed into a heart shape, and then she took a triangular piece of stock and carved that, and then so she would stamp the heart shape into the metal, and then she came back in and then used this texture of this on it, so one on top of each other. So you can do it individually and stamp them, or you can overlay them like you do with printmaking, where you run it through the press more than one time. It's on there. Some good suggestions for you is to go look at the Rio Grande catalog. It has stamps that they make for you. And my favorite is Indian Jewelry Supply House, but I don't have their catalog. The Southwest Indians, the Hopis and the Navajos, they were really smart and started taking like just nails and making beautiful stamps out of them, and really early on in their exposure to working in metal. So those would be a really good place to look for designs. Remember not to appropriate their claw hand that's a bear and things like that. Come up with your kind of your own idea. And for me, the exclamation mark seemed really pertinent there. So just to reiterate, we're going to do a scribe, and we're going to make a stamp, and you're going to use that stamp somewhere along the way in one of your projects throughout this quarter. It could be on a band ring, it could be a brooch, it could be earrings. But what's nice is when you come up with a design, is to make it repetitive, a repetitive pattern. So think about tile, think about working in units. It's really helpful for that. Another thing I do want to say is I had a student who carved bat wings, and then she had a stamp made with her Hallmark, and so she would stamp the bat wing stamp onto her piece, and then she'd go back in and use her Hallmark inside it. And so it was kind of a really neat way to make a Hallmark, is to elaborate more than just your initials that were on there. Okay, when it comes to working with the metal, I go down to Tacoma screw, and there's one over in Ballard, so you don't have to go down to Tacoma. And I buy what's called drill rod. And drill rod comes in many different sizes, and it's round, and it's what they make drill bits out of. So it is really good steel, hardened steel. The handout I give you describes what mild steel is, what tool steel is, what carbide steel is. And what I need to really emphasize is that when you start working with steel, it's a whole nother animal. So everything that you know about copper and brass and silver and how it anneals and how it works doesn't really relate to the steel side of things. But this is what's called W1, and it's water hardening steel. And I'll be showing you later in the video how to harden and temper it. But this is a piece right here. Before I start taking my hacksaw to it, I want to make sure that it's annealed. And can you see as I'm filing it, it's moving? So I know that it's not hardened, and I can go ahead and use it. You can find old tools, and old tools could be a file. They're really great because they're tool steel. You could find chisels. So this is an old chisel that was my dad's, and I keep thinking that I could make something really pretty interesting with this piece. Punches are really good for tool steel. Hex wrenches are really good and hardened. And then this was a tap that broke. And instead of throwing it out, I think I'm gonna grind the end on it, and I'm gonna have an interesting shape just by grinding it flat on the end. And that reminds me to tell you is when you go to make your stamp, it's really critical that these two ends are parallel to each other. If they're not, you're not gonna get a nice even stamp that's on there. So that's one of the first things we're gonna do is we're gonna grind our metal so that these two ends are parallel to each other. Another thing just to say is when you get those ground and parallel, then I like to take plasticine clay, so this is modeling clay, and I like to use it to see what my stamp's gonna be. So as I press into that, all it is the end of this. Let me pull it off if you can see it a little bit better. But it helps me figure out what my design is gonna look like in metal. Because when you carve into this, whatever you carve away is gonna be the opposite of what you think it's gonna be, because it's a stamp. So if you are gonna make a letter, make sure that the L is backwards or the S is backwards, because otherwise you'll be really disappointed. So I like to use this, and I like to just press into it, and I like to see what I get in my designs before I harden and temper. And you can see my hands are dirty. But that's a great way to see what your pattern's gonna be. And when I did this, I thought it would really be fun to do a bracelet that was either just in line like that, or I could do it so it was diagonal, and then it could run down. That wasn't straight, but it could run down diagonally that way as a pattern that's on there. So the plasticine clay is a great thing to use just to see what you've got going there. So let's get back to doing the scribes first. And so what I'm gonna do is I'll have steel for you guys, and I have it in 3 different sizes. I think I'm gonna go with the thin one just because it'll be faster to get done for the video for you guys. But if you like, and you can test them out, if you like a heavier one, we can use a heavier stock. But what you want to do is you want to cut these so that they're 6 inches in length. So I'm going to take my ruler and my pencil, and I joke with people and say I give you a grade based on the length of your scribe, because as you're learning to grind it, it's going to get shorter and shorter and shorter. I'm kidding on that. But I'm going to put this in the vise here. I have a hacksaw here. I could use my jeweler's saw, but a hacksaw is a nice tool when you start making tools because it cuts a little bit faster. This I can tell is not very sharp. And so I got a new blade. And so I just want to show you, you loosen this up, and then this comes off the pegs. And then you can put a clean new one on. What I want to tell you is I learned to use a jeweler's saw before I learned any other saw. And so what happened to me is I got humiliated in grad school because I got handed a hacksaw, and I had never used a hacksaw before, so I put the blade on the way you do a jeweler's saw. And a jeweler's saw is a cutting down. What you want this to do is you want it to cut in the opposite direction, so the teeth are facing away from you. So I'm going to tighten that up, and then I'm just going to come in right here. Let's twist it a little. And I'm going to saw right through this. I see people doing this. Use the whole length of the blade, and that way the blade will last longer. And then when these blades go bad and don't have any teeth left on them, I take them over to the ceramic studio and I give it to the ceramics teacher, because it's a really nice tool to use in ceramics as a smoothing agent. So these get recycled over to ceramics until they don't want any more of them. Something I want to tell you about steel is there's a little burr here, and if this was a piece of silver, I might try to pick it off. This is 3 times as hard as the metals we've worked with. This will slice you right open. So you want to be a lot more careful when you're working with steel, with the burrs that are on that. So I could solve that problem by putting it in the vise, taking my file to it, and filing that off. Or I can take it over to the grinder, which I'm going to do next. But before we move on, I want to take and I want to measure about a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch here. And so my end of this one is going to be tapered down like that, like a slotted screwdriver, right? And then this is going to taper down to being round. The longer the point on here is, the easier you can get into edges. So you want something that is sharpened like a pencil. Okay. Before we go over to the grinder, I just also want to say, when you cut your stamp material, and I think this one is cut and ready to go, you want it, I like my stamps a little bit shorter, so 3 or 4 inches. And the way that I stamp is I use that finger to be my tripod, and then my 3 fingers here, and I'm able to hit the top without hitting my fingers. When you have really tall, long ones, I find that they move around too much. So I really like to have them, for me, 3 inches, maybe 4 at the most. So that's what's also really nice, is you can make your own tools to fit your own hands that are on here. So this stamp needs to be parallel to each other. So I need to get out a square, and I need to put that right like that, and I need to roll it and make sure that it's square all the way around. And then I want to check this end, and that looks pretty good. Another way that you can check it is you can set it on a piece of steel, and you can take your square, and can you see it's off just a little bit? And then I'll rotate it and check it, and it's pretty right on there. And then also I have to check the other side and check and make sure it's okay. And I usually turn it at least a 1/4 turn to make sure that I'm on there. So these two need to be parallel. I'm going to show you guys how to get that parallel. But first, let's go over and do some grinding with the scribe. This is our grinder here. Just a side note here, you can go out and you can buy a grinder. They don't have to be really expensive. This is a horsepower, 1 horsepower. Mine in my studio is a 1/2 horsepower. It's a little less expensive. What I want to say that what I did before I could afford to buy a polishing machine is I bought a small grinder that actually only had a 1/4 horsepower on it, and I took off the wheels and I put on a tapered cone on them, and I used them as my buffing machine. I had a cardboard box and I had an old Sunbeam vacuum cleaner hooked up to the back of it, and for the first 10 years or so in my studio, that's how I worked. These are not going to work for me. You could actually leave one grinding wheel on and use this in a polishing situation. If you're interested, talk to me and I can help you figure out the way to do that. But these grinders have a coarse and they have a finer one. Usually in un-COVID days, I'd have one person here and one person here. We're going to have to work separately. But the coarser one is going to grind a lot faster for you. This is going to refine it. So this is about 80 grit and this is about 150 grit. From there, we're going to go over to the belt sander and then we're going to go to the polishing machine. So some things you need to know is that these grinders are made to only grind on the front face. You never want to grind on the side. They will shatter. The other thing you want to do is make sure that the tool rest is close enough to the grinder so that you don't get your tool caught down in there. So as you guys are using these, and if you come up and you see a gap that's about the thickness of what you're grinding, call me over, we'll slide this back. So as these wheels get smaller, we need to adapt that. You never want to get that caught in there. So that's one thing to look at. You want to pull your hair back anytime it's rotational. You want to wear a face shield. And what you want to know is when you start grinding this, there are going to be little sparks coming off, and so it's going to be like the little sparkler thing in the 4th of July. I am not a knife maker. I really admire knife makers. They're amazing. Phil Baldwin is an amazing knife maker. Ernie Limecooler, another guy I know. I know enough to make some tools for my jewelry business, but I'm not a knife maker. A knife maker would be able to grind a piece of steel and tell by the sparks how much carbon it has in it. So these sparks are going to come off and then they're going to break up a little bit, and that's going to give you a sign that it's good high carbon steel. The other thing that you need to know is if I lay this down flat and I grind it, it's going to take on the profile of the wheel. So you're going to start doing that and then you're going to realize you have to adapt. And the way that you adapt is you don't lay it flat, you tilt it up. So you envision this circle and then you envision this going right into the center. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to start grinding, and I'm not going to just grind in one place because I'll put a groove in my my stone. I'm going to work back and forth, and you just have to get in the habit of learning to do that back and forth. If I just grind in the center, we're going to chew up these these wheels, and I can show you guys how to true them up, but I don't want to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is grind the two ends parallel to each other. So I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to come in. I'm going to lay this flat, and I'm going to work back and forth. Do you notice that it's not parallel? It's taking on the curve of the wheel. So I need to accommodate for that. And so what I've got to do is not lay it flat. I got to tilt it up a little. You notice that my hand is right here holding it nice and smooth. And now does that look more like a 90-degree angle? My cameraman, pretty close. So there's some burrs on it. I'm going to take the burr off by just tapping it. I'm off today, but that doesn't surprise me. Okay, there we go. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this end. Lay it down flat. I'm going to get a curve. So I'm going to accommodate. Off a little still. a little better. How do I check? I check with my square, right? Okay, so from here now that I've got that idea of the grinding wheel, I'm gonna try to make my pencil. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in from the side and I'm gonna rotate like this. And it's really a good practice with the pencil to get good at it. If I stop along the way, I'm gonna have a flat spot. Is that these are about grinding down about the same all the way. It's easier for me to do it this way, but I'm going to keep doing it this way for... No, it's okay. If I do this, it's going to be a stubby point. I got to come at this angle, and now you know why it's important that this dot be right. My end should be round. Okay, so I got a ways to go. And you know what I'm doing that's really bad? Sorry. My glasses are not safety glasses. Turn dark and blue on the end. That is the tempering stage. And with a piece of steel that isn't hardened and tempered, it doesn't matter. But you would never want to come over here and grind on your knife that's hardened and tempered because you lose the edge of it. But that's getting up there to 600-700 degrees. It's amazing that steel doesn't conduct heat, so I can still hold on to this and have it be that hot. But I'm almost to where I need to be. And what I'm looking for is it round on the end. Are these points about the same distance? Looks pretty good for our first grind. This is a little hot on the end, so I'm going to go over and cool it. I could have had a bowl of water there. The thing about water and steel make rust, so you want to be really careful about that. Okay. Now I'm going to take on making a slotted screwdriver. So my slotted screwdriver, if I just lay it down flat, I've got to compensate for that angle, just like I did on the end. So I'm going to turn it and tilt it. Overcompensated. Now I gotta turn it back a little. Parallel right on the end there, looks pretty good. Look at that tempering color. Now I gotta do the other side. couple of facets in here. And I think, as a beginner, I would just take a file to it, but let me see if I can speed this up. Still off. But my end is now really to a point. I'm going to come in and make that a 90, and it's going to show me what I've got. Do you see I've got a lot more material on that side? So I got to take some of that off. A little more parallel now. So I do have some facets here. Reminds me of a jet engine. Okay. So I'm going to now stop at this point. You see this side's longer than that side? I'm going to show you with a file how to fix it. Just because you guys will spend all day, and this will get shorter and shorter and shorter until you learn to practice getting that angle that's there. Okay, let's move back over to the bench. Now I do want to talk about files. I've never felt like I had the money to be able to have files for my steel and files for my other metals. There are a lot of people that just think that's the worst thing in the world. What I've done is I'll use my file, and then after I'm through filing on the steel, I'll take my file card and I'll come in and I'll clean my file the best that I can. And so I do use my files that I use in my regular, sorry for the purists. But this is a coarse file, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hold this here and I'm going to file and smooth it out. My file. And this is where really knowing how to file is important. Looking pretty good. This side here is longer, so I'm going to have to go back in. But can you see that I am really correcting what I couldn't get right on the grinder with a file? So in a time where people are working from home, I think we're going to rely on files even more than ever, instead of motorized things that you don't have in your shop. So that's always important, to make sure that the end is parallel, so it's a slotted screwdriver. And I'm going to grind this down with my file a little bit farther to that 1/2 inch line. And then these two sides should be more the same. This is a lot farther. So the flat file works great for that. I could use, and at your bench pin it would be easier, but I could use my file to do the round. And it's also giving it a better finish. Finer, I guess I should say, not better, finer. It's on there. Okay, so that's one way to true things up. Another way to true things up is I want to introduce you to this belt sander. It's just a relatively inexpensive belt sander. It's called a belt sander because this is the belt. If you come to use it and the belt is all worn out, call me over and I'll show you how to put this on. Got to put it on the right way with the arrows and everything. I think this is going to work fine. So that's the belt. This is the disc, and this is the one I'm going to use to true everything up. One of the things you want to make sure before you start using the tool is that you want to make sure that this is parallel. Do you see it's not right now? So when I go to grind this, it's going to be just like the wheel do is I've got to loosen up this and I've got to make it a 90-degree angle. If you're having troubles when you go to check it, call me over and I can come do this, or Erin can come do this. Still off. There?
Yep.
It's hard enough getting old with your eyes. Is that good?
Yep.
And then having fogged up glasses, I tell you. I wish I could wear contacts, but I can't anymore. So now I've got that as a perfect 90-degree angle so that I'm working off of a flat surface. The other thing you want to do is make sure, if you're going to use this jig, that it's a 90-degree angle. So I've loosened it up and I'm going to tighten it. And this shows that it's not exactly on 0, but I'm going to trust my square over this that's probably been dropped on the floors a million times as a student project. Okay. So now that I know when I go in and I do my grinding that I've got a flat surface to work off of. So the first thing I want you to know is when I turn this on, make sure you've got eye protection, make sure, so I'm going to put your hair's pulled back, don't wear a scarf or anything. And then this rotates going this way. This also rotates clockwise. So when I'm grinding, am I right or wrong about that? The dyslexia comes in. It actually works counterclockwise. So it runs this way. And so when I'm working, if I work over here, it's just going to keep lifting it up, right? So I'm going to want to work this side, okay? And the first thing I want to do is I want to make my slotted screwdriver want to do is watch what the person's doing with their hands. I've got this down flat here, I'm holding it down, and then I'm using my fingers to push it against the wheel. Okay, and now I'm going to flip over and do the other side. To get a 90 degree, I might as well use my jig. And see if it's square. Looks pretty good. This is still off a little. So I'm going to mess with it a little bit more. Does it matter for how the tool is going to work? No, but precision is really important. So it's closer to being straight. I've got that facet there I've got to fix. Can you see that? So this is shifting a little bit. So when I'm lifting up a little bit. I got to push down on this end. There we go. So when you're doing this, if you're having problems with it, don't just keep doing it. Stop and try to figure out what you've done wrong. And what I was doing wrong was lifting it up. should also notice I'm trying to use the whole sandpaper, not working just in one direction or in one spot.
Beautiful.
That works. It's a little off there. So for the round, I'm going to come in, I'm going to put my hand here. Never wear gloves because you'll get sucked in and you'll be unhappy. And I'm going to rotate. And I'm going to try to move it while I'm rotating it. Good. Cool. I'm just going to... That'll tell me if I'm round or not. And I'm off a little bit, so I'm gonna come in. I can't roll it here very well, so I'm holding it up and on the plate. I'm gonna call it good. Shut this off. Just for the fun of it, I'm gonna grade myself. And I have lost about a little more than a 1/16 of an inch. Not bad. Still wanna fix this. So I'm gonna take my file. And you can see that that sanding disc was a 120, which was finer than actually the file I was using. So now from here, I think I'm okay. I could test to see if this works in my flex shaft tools. And then this looks pretty good. But what we want to do is we want to bring these to a mirrored finish, especially the scribe, so that when you're scratching it along, you get a nice even drag. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the polishing machine, and we're going to use this stuff called Quick Finish. And I use it sometimes on my non-ferrous metals, but it's really designed for finishing up this. If you don't have a polishing machine and you don't have Quick Finish, you could go to now sandpaper on a stick and do 220, 320, 400. And then for the final polish on this, we have a steel compound that polishes it, but I've gotten away with it when I haven't had it and used white diamond. Okay. So we're going to go over to the buffing machine here, and I'm going to show you Quick Finish. The Quick Finish comes from Rio Grande, and the reason why it's called a Quick Finish is because it finishes things quickly, but it also dries really quickly. So I have my compound in here, and I have a wet sponge in here, and this is the compound that I'm going to put on the wheel, and this is a 120 finish. You need to leave the lid on it at all times because it dries out so quickly. And in this lid here, we have our buffing wheels, and I'm going to use this buffing wheel, so I'll pull that out. So I'm going to use the Quick Finish 120 first, and then I'm going to go to the 400. And pull out the 400 wheel. And then the 400 is in this container now. And it's just finer, so it's like a 400 sandpaper finish. So these are the ones I'm going to work with. And I'm going to come over to this buffing machine here. I'm going to choose the bigger hole to thread this on. Would it be better over here?
No, I think that'll be wherever is comfortable for you. None
of it's comfortable. No, I'm just kidding. So this is on. What's really neat about this is that you can see when you need to add more compound. So I'm going to grab my face shield. I'm going to turn the machine on. I'm going to load this. And then I'm going to put the lid right back on so it doesn't dry out. And this is drying real quick. Like, I always show people that you can polish your fingernails with the buffing machine, with the polishing stuff. This, you do not want to do it. This is like sandpaper. You would be unhappy. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to rotate. And I'm going to work in both directions. This way and then also this way. And ideally, I want to finish this so that there's no scratches. You can round the nose on this a little too much and then it's not going to drag very well. So be careful about that. That's why I kind of like to work in both directions, this way and this way. And then you can, if you want to, polish the whole thing with a quick finish. I had a student that really loved making these, and so she was a leather worker too. And so she would make these and then make a leather pouch for them and sell them for about $40 to all my students. And everybody was happy. So now I'm going to do this one. Until those scratches are out from the belt sander. And pretty good. Sometimes when I tilt it back and forth, I can see the reflection a little bit better. And can you see that I've got some scratches there? So now I gotta come in. Just gonna thicken up the end a little bit by coming in this way. That looks good to me. So this could be a little bit longer, not as taper, a longer taper on it, but I think it's gonna be okay. Now what I wanna do is just take a scrap piece of metal and see if I'm gonna draw a line on it, how it draws. And it doesn't pull one way or another, so I think I've got a good scribe. And that's really nice because you can line it up, hold your pencil there, and now you've got a really good line to follow off of. And there's a little bit of a bite there, so you can actually create pattern and texture with your scribe. I always like to think of multiple purposes when I make things. Tools. But this is how I feel about coronavirus. Sorry. I still haven't finished those earrings. I can't quite go back to it. But anyway, now we've got a nice tool. It's ready to go. We'll twist it. I always get everything finished before I twist it. So just for you to know, what I would do is I would come back now with the 400, and the 400 is black, and it will give me an even finer finish. So you do all of this before you harden and temper, and we're going to twist it before we harden and temper it, because by heating it we would lose our temper. So just as steps, you want to cut it to 6 inches, measure that 1/2 inch, grind a taper on one end. Ooh, isn't that beautiful? This looks nice on metal too. So sometimes it's nice to finish this up. This is 400. It won't take off my roll printed pattern, but it's a nice way if you like satin finishes. which I love. They don't sell as well because everybody likes shiny. But there's my coronavirus. Okay. So the 400, and then we can use white diamond on it, and I don't know if I need to go on to that with this demo because you guys know how to do that. But I've got what I think is a lovely tool to work with. Just real quick, like I do want to talk about this tool has gotten rusty and it's probably just been exposed to water. So I'm going to use this to see if I can clean it up. And that's going to be a little bit slower, so I might as well come over to the coarser. Yep, and that's going to take this off. I know that when I worked in a hardware store, they used to use navel jelly to clean up the tools. It's pretty corrosive and not good for your skin or anything. So for me, I've always gone back to just mechanically removing the rust. And then after I get them cleaned up, if I'm not going to use them, I did that too soon. It hadn't dried fast enough. So I jumped right in. I should have let it run for a second or two longer. But you can see that that's going to clean up this old tool. And when you buy old hammers and you want to reshape them and repurpose them, you'll be doing the same thing. But at least get the rust off. I just feel like if you work with beautiful tools, your work comes out more beautiful. But then Roger Horner, who used to be the tech at the UZ, him and I had a problem with, we liked making tools more than making our art. But that's going to bring it back to life. Okay. Okay, so we're back, and I've got this half round steel stock that I'm going to make kind of a half rising sun thing. And what I did is I took a round file and I filed a groove for that part. And then I have taken a jeweler's saw and I've sawn in right in between my notches so that I have something to catch my triangular file with. And now I'm going to take my triangular file and I'm going to just go in, and it will stay right where the cut was. And I'll have a lot more accuracy than if I just tried to do it without that saw mark there. And I want to widen these a little bit, so I'm leaning the file that way a little bit, leaning the file this way a little bit to make it wider, and then I'm going to move on to this one. And I always have a tendency to cut my stamps a little deeper. You can see the angle that I'm at than really needs to be. You really only need to carve in about the thickness of the metal that you're going to be working with, because it's not going to stamp any deeper than that. But that's how I've gotten that form there. And then now to check to see if it's what I want, I'm going to come over here to my plasticine clay, and I'm going to push down in it, and I'm going to see how I feel. Now plasticine clay has steel filings in it. Oh well. But there we go. So I'm thinking that I can either do them like that, so it's a full circle, or I could go in and use it in a band ring, and I could do it, oops, it would help if this were flat. And I could run it so that they alternate as they go down. So, okay. So you want the two parallel edges, and you want to make sure that you're doing all your filing, sawing, cutting when it's not hardened. And so this is one that I did just recently. I just kind of wanted to make like the craters of the moon. So what I did is I took a half round file or a round file and I filed the edges a little bit. And then I went back in with a ball burr and I burred in some of that. And I think it's going to be a pretty interesting pattern just all over. Working with it more as something like that. And so I think I'm comfortable with these. I could take a piece of scrap metal and stamp on it, but I really like to harden them before I do that because I don't want to change the angles here on this. The other thing I should say is if you want a mirrored finish for the stamping, you should put a mirrored finish on the end of the tool before you carve into it, because then you'll have a shiny pattern showing up. I always kind of like something that's textured. So this not only has the carving that I have in it, but it's got sandpaper lines that are going to hopefully extend kind of on the rays that are there. And I can see I'm not completely done with this because this one is bothering me, so I may have to go back in. Yeah, this one needs to be filed a little bit more. I want these to come to a point on the ends. So the good news is if I mess this up, I can just take this over to the belt sander and grind it down past where I've carved, and then I can redo it. But I really wanted more points on these, and I should probably spend a little more time working on this, and I'll harden the other one for you. In points, that's what I want. Okay. So now we've got this metal that would work for a while, but over time it's going to start to change shape because it's annealed and you're hammering it a lot with a hard hammer and onto steel. So what we need to do now is we need to harden and temper, and this is where people get confused on working with non-ferrous metals and ferrous metals, because annealing and tempering is the opposite of what we've been doing. So I have these right now, and if I want to harden this, what I need to do is I need to heat this up to bright red, and I need to quench it. And this is water hardening steel, so I'm going to quench it in a water bowl. If you have oil hardening steel, you can do it with oil, just car oil. Knife makers will say there's got to be a special oil and all of that and everything, but what we're doing, you don't have to worry too much. I like to use water hardening steel because I don't like the fumes from the oil when you stick a hot tool into it. But that said, a lot of people feel like that's a better steel. I don't know if I'll live long enough to wear these out, so I don't really care. So I'm going to harden these, and then I got to repolish them a little bit, and then we're going to temper them. And what tempering does is it takes it down from being glass hard to just hard. So if you've ever taken your favorite file and dropped it on the floor and the tip is broken off, it's because these are hardened, but they're not tempered, because they need to be harder than anything else you're carving. So the tempering brings them back down so that they're still hard, but they're not brittle. And that's where being a knife maker is really important, so that it isn't brittle when you're carving hard on it. It doesn't snap, but it also holds a really good edge. So we're going to go in and do that at the workbench. We're going to use the torch, going to heat them up, and I'm going to stir them in water. This piece of steel with my torch, this whole thing is not going to get red hot, so I'm going to heat the end, swirl it in water, heat the other end, swirl it in water, because those are the two parts that we really need hard. You can also harden it in a kiln by heating it up, getting it up to a red, and then quenching it. But I think a torch is kind of more likely what people would have to work with. After I do that, there's going to be oxides on the surface, so I'm going to have to clean those off. And then I'm going to temper it, and the tempering is another step that we'll do. and it's heating it up to 600 degrees, and it softens it so it's not brittle, but it's still hard enough to hold an edge. To harden these pieces, so I'm going to show you something that I don't recommend that you do, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually hold on to the end of this while I'm heating it up until bright yellow, and then I'm going to swirl it in this water here. Make sure that you have your water bowl right where you're where you're heating it up, because you don't want to take a lot of time getting it into the water. It needs to be red hot. This is just to show you how steel doesn't conduct heat the way that the non-ferrous metals do. And so I'm gonna grab onto it. Are we in an okay spot? And I'm just gonna heat the end. And this may get hot on me, because this is a short one. So I'm rotating it a little bit so that it's even heating. And what I'm looking for is a dull cherry red. Can you see that coloration that's happening? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm about there. And I'm gonna swirl it in the water, cool it down. So there's two different ways of thinking about it. Some people harden both ends. What I find is if you harden the other end, when you strike it, it bounces back a little bit more. I find it a little bit tougher on my wrists and things. So I usually just harden the end that I don't want to lose my pattern. So I'm going to take this one now, and I'm going to do the same thing. If this were a piece of copper or silver, my hands would be burning right now. So when you're working with steel, you don't have to heat the whole piece when you solder it, and you can use silver solder with steel. Don't put it in the pickle with other metals, but it does silver solder very well. So I'm going to get this back to heating up to the reddish temperature. And because it doesn't conduct heat well, it's good that you rotate and make sure that all of it is red. And you can see some colorations that's running down the side of this. That's actually the color of tempering. So I'm getting to that red, and now I'm going to swirl. So those are now glass hard. And what I want to do now is I want to scuff off the oxides so that I can temper it. And sometimes I can just do it with my Scotch-Brite pad. Try always not to use your sandpaper and your Scotch-Brite on your soldering area. I see a lot of my students doing that. Some of it's because the benches are pretty small, but it's really a good habit to get into, not doing anything except soldering and heating metal on your Maronite board. Okay, so I've got a lot of the oxides off. And what I want to do now, I did not polish these because I want a texture on the edge. If you want a beautiful star shape that's shiny, you would want to polish this edge. Have to be really careful though. What I do is I take it down to 600 sandpaper with a sanding stick, and then I lightly hit it with some white diamond, because you don't want to roll the edge, otherwise it won't stamp. But this is ready to temper. So I'm going to set this here, and the way that I temper my tools is I heat right in the middle, and I watch the heat expanding out. And what I want to do is I want to see a straw yellow on the end, which means I should clean this up a little bit so that I can see that straw yellow. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to set it down on the fireboard. And because this takes a long time to heat up, what happens to people is they start heating it and then it goes too fast, and then they have to harden it and re-temper it. So if you get it past the straw yellow that we're looking for, you just harden it, clean it, and then temper it again. But I'm going to come in and I'm going to heat the middle, because the middle is not hardened, right? So we don't care about its temper. What we want to do is hold that edge on that lovely design that I did. And sometimes I'll lift it off to see what's happening. And can you see some of the brown coming on? So there's a really dark brown, there's a little bit more of a straw. I rolled it a little bit. And I'm gonna wait a moment, but you've got the blue, the purple, the brown, and what I wanna do is see if it's gonna slide down to the end. Right now I see a little brown right there. And this takes some time to learn to see. But those peacock colors that are there are really a good sign for you to know you're getting the heat that you need. And see, there's the brown. I'm almost seeing a little bit of straw yellow there. What do you think? Yeah, no? You can probably see better with that camera than my eyes.
I think the very middle is not quite yellow,
okay,
according to this camera.
Okay, so I'll heat it just a little bit more. So really, really big, thick pieces like this take a lot more heat. Littler ones are going to heat up so fast. Does that look good?
Yeah.
Okay. Set it, let it cool, and then you've got it tempered. Okay. I also, while you're here, I want to show you how to anneal a piece of steel. So some just quick reminders. Tool steel is different. Tool steel has carbon in it, and what we're doing is we're hardening it to make it so that it holds its edge. A good knife, a good stamping tool. You do that by heating it up to bright red, and with this water hardening, W1, you swirl it in water. Don't just drop it, but swirl it in there so that it really cools it down. After that point, what you want to do is temper it. And I have to tell you, we went too far.
Did we? Oh no. Yeah.
So really the color we were looking for is on this other end. So what do? I heat it bright red and I swirl it in water again. Shall I do that again?
Sure.
Okay.
Should have let it sit for another minute.
I know. You want to really be patient with it. And since this is already hot, I think I'm just going to hold it with the tweezers. So one of the things I really love about metal is most of the time you can fix your mistakes. This is a perfect example of that. Not always, but mostly.
And so if we left it too dark, is it too soft or too
Then
hard?
it's going to be too soft and it won't hold its edge. So there we go. Let's swirl this. Oops. And I have to now clean it up. A lot of times I'll put a polish on it because you can see the tempering better with a polish, especially on the end. But I still think we'll be able to
Yeah,
get
that
some
looks
color
silver.
on there. I'm going to set it that way so you can wash it. Okay, so I quenched it. That hardened it. It made it brittle. If I hardened this hand and then I hit it with a hammer, it probably would crack. I had a student have that happen to them. So you need to temper whether you're doing one end or both ends. And I'm just going to come in and heat a little bit. Pull the flame away. I think it's already there, isn't it? Nope. Come on, I'm not even getting the colors I normally do. Is it that cold? Nope. There we go. I'm going to be really patient, and I'm just going to wait and see what happens. So while that's cooling, what I want to do is I want to show you, I have this that I've trued up. This is going to be my pattern that I'm going to cut into it, but when I went to start to file it, you hear that glass sound? it's too hard, which reminded me that I did the file test. I need to anneal it. So to anneal steel, I'm going to heat this end up to bright red, and I'm going to shove it into sand. You can also shove it into vermiculite. But what this does is it makes it slowly cool down. And it might take 5 minutes for it to cool down. I've done hammerheads where it's taken a couple of hours for it to cool down. But what you want to do is shove it into sand, and that allows it to cool slower. And that will make it, you heard this sound? You're going to hear that different sound after I anneal this. So I'm going to go ahead and light the torch. Remember, files are incredible good steel. I heat the end. I'm going to turn my heat up a little. It needs cleaning. It's dirty. I do really recommend that you use a pair of pliers or tweezers when you do this, but I like to show you guys. This usually ingrains in your head that this doesn't transfer heat. Am I getting some red coming up there?
A little bit.
There it goes. It's starting to come up. So you want it to be a yellow red. I mean a red red. You don't want it a yellow because that's where you're almost to the melting stage, although these torches would have a hard time doing that. But that looks good to me. Now shove it down into the sand and let it sit until it completely cools.
How does our stamp look?
Can't tell. Let me go polish the end of this real quick. So I'm back here now. I've polished the end of this so that I can see when I get the tempering. So that's really important to be able to have it shiny, to be able to see the colors that we need to have happen. And I'm heating in the middle. And the good news is I was able to go back and harden it and then redo it. So I'm going to roll this a little bit and then heat this side because this is a little bit of a heat sink. And I know nothing's there yet, but this is the time to like sip on a couple cups of coffee. So there's my coloration. It's a little there. I'm just gonna wait. Ooh, that's still warm. It's just a straw yellow. So there's something on the board here. But I can kind of see the straw yellow to about there. I'm gonna do just a little bit more heat. So a lot of times after I get the temper on this, I choose just to leave the tempering color on it. And that's because a lot of times I'm in progress, like this one's ready to be tempered, but I'm probably not going to do it now, and I'll remember that I need to do that because I haven't changed the color of it.
It's starting to look gold.
Is it starting to get gold?
A little bit. I think so.
Oh yeah. Can you see it on that? Okay. So it's good. I'm going to set it there. Like I said, I would never say that I'm really knowledgeable about making knives, but basic tools that I need in my studio work really well. So I've got my scribe. I think it's all ready to go. I will need to harden and temper it, but before I do that, I want to do a hot twist on it and put some nice twists on it because I think I like feeling it better that way than the sharp edges of this 90 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in, okay, I don't usually do it here. So I'm gonna put it in the vise. Come on out. And I'm gonna tighten it down. And I'm gonna freeform eyeball this. And what I mean by that is if I wanted to something really accurately, I would like make center and figure out where I'm gonna twist it. Just gonna eyeball it. And what I need is a pair of vice grips. So let me go get a pair. Okay, so I'm back. This is a pair of vice grips, and what I like to say to people is I didn't know for a long time how to really use these. This opens and closes the jaws. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reach here and I'm gonna tighten it down till it's snug. Then to release it, you push this here. I'm gonna turn this just a little bit more so it makes a little harder bite on it. Okay, and then I'm gonna pull on it a little bit to see. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold this and I'm gonna use the torch and I'm gonna heat it. And when it starts to turn red, where it's turning red, I'm gonna twist it. So this is kind of like spot forming. Because this whole thing isn't gonna get hot, it's only gonna twist where it's red. And I was gonna use this big torch, but I think I'm gonna use my Goss. Because I think this will get hot enough. And I'm gonna be doing it left-handed, so bear with me on this. But what I wanna do is hold it out straight. I wanna heat right where I want the first twist to go. Remember, in past the blue cone, you lose all your heat. So I just want to heat right towards the end of the blue cone. You can see those beautiful tempering colors coming up. I'm going to pull straight and twist. I'm going to see if I can get this to twist. It's not ready to twist yet. There we go. And do you see how it really localizes where it's going to twist? So I'm going to come down a little bit farther. And I'm going to twist again, and I'm trying to keep it as straight as possible. And I'm almost tempted to stop there, but I won't. I'll go on. And then if I want to twist it back, what I do to get a tighter twist, and then I come down, and then I get it hot enough to twist in the other direction. And I want to make sure that the tops here and here are level with each other. But I think I'll do one more twist. And should I do one more and make it symmetrical?
Yeah.
Symmetry. Okay, there we go. So this is really a fun thing to learn to do, and you can do this with non-ferrous metals as well. I'm gonna break this loose. Can you see the tempering colors that are on it? So you want to do your twist before you harden and temper, because we would have lost our tempering on this. So after this cools down, I'm going to harden each end by heating it up to bright red and dipping it into the water. With the tip here, you have to be really careful when you're heating it to not heat at the point, but heat where there's more mass, where it's a little bit meatier, because you don't want to melt this tip and you don't want to melt the end there. So I'll be coming in and heating about a ½ inch down from the point and the slot here on that. So it's not too uneven, but if yours ends up not rolling well, it means it's not straight, and I can show you how to straighten that out. But this one's not bad. All right.